Hello and welcome to the Engerati studio here at African Utility Week. I'm now joined by Wessel Bakker. I hope I've pronounced your name right,
That's correct.
Wessel.
That's perfect.
Who's from DNV Kema, and you're part of the consulting side of the company. And we were talking off air a little bit about some of the key themes that are coming through the conference, and renewables, it comes as no surprise, is a key area, and it's an area that you do a lot of work in, and,
Yes.
and there's special issues about integrating it to the grid and stuff like that. What are the sort of things you're seeing either locally here or globally?
Well, actually, we see these issues basically globally, but I can tell that in Africa you have some additional challenges that I think we can deliver some very unique value, and we've shown that already. I mean, we all are aware of that a lot of renewables are to be integrated into the grids in Africa, and this development will proceed pretty fast and it will grow enormously. The question is, of course, are the grids capable to deal with that? And the answer is basically, well, there's a lot possible. So that's good news.
Right. That sounds like a mixed answer.
It is, of course, yeah. Well, it is that's a challenge, of course, we have altogether. And but in order to be able to get some assurance in that it is possible, well, that is something we can offer. We can do feasibility analysis or study if you want to connect a large chunk of renewables to the grid, for example. I mean, we have a lot of expertise. Kema DNV Kema is well renowned for its knowledge in energy assets. We have a huge amount of experts, and those are experts that can zoom into components, right? And identify if that is appropriate to use, or is the component fit for use in an existing grid. But it is also about looking at the total picture. Is the grid capable to balance the demand and supply that you have in a country?
Because there's a big issue with renewables just within their nature, that well, certainly for some renewables, when the wind blows when
Exactly.
the wind blows,
Yeah,
you can't turn
you
it
can
on
control
or off,
that. No.
and then how the grid reacts to when things come on stream. I mean, that's a big issue for very mature grids, let alone where you're building out.
Yes, that's right. So what we do if someone has a plan or wants to develop such a large-scale renewable plant, and that can be solar power, that can be wind power, but it can also be conventional plant. I mean, there is anyhow a big need for additional power in Africa, and demand is rising. So that needs to be done anyhow. Now, what we then do is that we look at the total. We can look at the total grid situation. We can also incorporate the stakeholders, such, of course, as the transmission system operator, for example. And we have a very good understanding about the business of a transmission system operator. We know all the technicalities and all the issues that they have. And by that, we are a very good speaking partner, if I may say so, to deal with that and to involve them into the process.
So they aren't making mistakes that may have already been, or taking learnings from elsewhere and applying them. The point I'm getting to with that is that there seems to, certainly in some of the other interviews we've had, what an opinion is forming that there may be an opportunity here not to necessarily leapfrog technologies, but to build a grid that has renewables more at its core, because some of the opportunity is greenfield at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, or?
Well, I would say the existing grids are basically an heritage of many decades, and what we can do is then look at how well is fit for purpose. If you want to incorporate these new plans or even additions to grids, and how to deal with that. You have to be very smart in that, and I think that is what we can do. We can look how can you upgrade an existing grid, for example, or existing connections. Sometimes you have a capability to increase power in existing grid,
right.
But you have to look at it in a very smart way, and you have to do some very thorough analysis in advance.
Well,
and this is exactly what we can offer. We have the experts, regardless of what issue pops up, we have the experts to make very clearly assessment and statements about it, and then come with a proposal how to do it. And once you have identified that, then we can also secure that it is done in the right way. I mean, yeah, in the end, contractors, manufacturers, whoever, they have to build it, they have to deliver. Okay, that is understood, but then it is really comes to the moment of truth. Is it really being designed and delivered according to what we agreed upon?
Right.
This is quality, of course, that in the end has to be delivered. Otherwise, you end up in projects that are over budget, they are over time, you have a lot of delays, and that costs a lot of money. And I think that is also the value we can offer, that we can secure that each step is being done according to what was agreed upon. And we have the experts to monitor that.
And do you, you mentioned earlier that there are opportunities where you can get more power out of existing infrastructure if you look at it in a smart way. Now that's a very simple statement, but it sounds very complex underneath it. Do you have any sort of case studies that you can talk about quickly where that's happened and what the results were?
Well, for example, we have developed, as we call it, a dynamic rating system. And basically, if you have a connection, and it can be cable, it can be a high voltage line or transformer, if you have this intermittent behavior of this power generation of renewables, you can of course say, okay, I have a certain power rating of this connection, and that's up to a certain level. But it is possible to go above that, as long as you don't do it too long. And to predict in advance how long can you overperform in that regard without hazarding the physics of the connection. Well, that is exactly what we can do. So make an appropriate assessment, how far can you go, and also delivering the tools or I would say basics to achieve that. That is what we can do. And that can solve a lot of these issues, definitely.
And what sort of, there's a lot of talk about getting renewables connected to the grid.
Yes.
But we've also had interviews where people have said, well, actually, you may not want to do that. It may not be the right thing to do. It may actually make more sense to have I think what we're calling now microgrids, where communities and especially in the rural environment are doing that. Are you seeing a lot of that discussion going on?
Of course, yes, of course. And I mean, there are many ways to solve the demand issue that is arising in Africa, and but I think in the end, if you ask me personally, I think we need both. We need a macro approach looking for large-scale renewable integration, and we need also at the same time in parallel look to a micro approach with microgrids and that kind of thing. And that's in fact it's already happening, and this is also where we can give a recommendation.
And do you think that when you look at some of the things that are being done in China, where generation is up here because that's where all the hydro is, we've got some great, power lines down to where the consumption,
as well, by the way.
Consumption is. Well, then the next part of the question might resonate. Do you think Africa as a continent needs to think a bit like that across boundaries, across geos, and say, right, okay, well, you're rich in this, and if you agree with that, is it happening? Do you see glimmers of it, or is it already there?
Yes. I mean, there's always a dream or a vision, so to speak, that everything is connected in the continent and between continents. But you see already, also in Europe and everywhere else in the world, this is already happening. So Yeah, I'm in favor of that, and I think it's very useful to do it. Why? Because if we talk about balancing, I mean, if you can, for example, connect a large-scale renewable wind farm, several hundred megawatts, if you can connect that via an interconnector to, say, a large hydropower plant, that's a perfect, well-balanced energy supply you get, and in a renewable way, by the way. That's perfectly fine. Because if there's no wind, you can just turn on the crane, so to speak, and or the water, and you have sufficient power. So that's a perfectly mechanism. But that can very often only be achieved if you're well connected, well interconnected with other countries as well. So yes, I think that would be a very good development, and we see it happening already. I mean, there are plans, for example, about the interconnector between Kenya and Ethiopia, which is a very perfect example of that. But also between Kenya and Tanzania, for example, there's also plans for interconnection. So you see it already happening, and I think it's a very useful and good development to create this a stable situation.
Because at some point in the future, we're going to have this on a global scale, aren't we? But physics might get in the way.
Well, I mean, today already, it is perfectly feasible to make a connection, say, about 2,000 kilometers. If you do it on HVDC with the newest technology, and then you have the total losses limited to 10%. 2,000 kilometers, 10% losses. So, I mean, we also have discussions in Europe about connecting the large solar potential of the Sahara region to Europe. That's, I would say, it is feasible. You can do that. Of course, it is also a question about do we get a license to build, and that's also where we can play this role. I mean, there are many stakeholders that need to be satisfied in a certain way, and this is where we can play our role as consultant to achieve that. So I would say we're basically, an important enabler of all these projects.
Well, someone has to have the knowledge, because it's so fragmented and there's so many variables and everything.
Yes.
We're coming to the end of our time here, so I'm going to ask you a question which is more connected with where we are. We are at African Utility Week. We're at day 2, so you've had a day of it. And what are some of the things that you may have seen around the show, or talks that you've had, which you would pull out? Let's say if I make you the reporter for a second, and that you would pull out and say, oh, that's interesting, that's good.
I would say it's beautiful to be here and to discuss with everyone the challenges everyone has, and also the great possibilities we have in Africa. And there is a lot possible. And if we somehow connect the right stakeholders all together, and add that little bit of quality to that, and then we can have a bright future for Africa, for sure.
Well, that's a good note to end the interview on. And again, thank you very much for taking the time. And thank you for watching this interview. As you know by now, or if you're watching an Ingerati interview for the first time, you may not. There are over 600 sessions available on demand, so you can watch some of the conference presentations that have happened at our many events, but also, more importantly, companies like DNV Kema are submitting case studies, white papers, and other knowledge onto Ingerati, and that's free for you to download, so please do explore that as well. And thank you for watching.